You know what nobody talks about? There's an entire generation walking around with money in the bank, stable careers, paid-off houses, and they still can't sleep at night because somewhere in the back of their mind, they're convinced it's all about to disappear. Picture this scenario. It's a random Tuesday evening. You're 52 years old. You've got $85,000 in savings, a decent retirement account, and you haven't missed a mortgage payment in 20 years. By every objective measure, you're doing fine. Better than fine, actually. But you're lying awake at 11:30 p.m. running calculations in your head. What if the company downsizes next quarter? What if the car needs a new transmission? What if your kid needs help with college tuition you didn't anticipate? What if, what if, what if? Sound familiar? Welcome to the scarcity mindset of Generation X, the generation that has more financial stability than they're psychologically capable of enjoying. Here's what's fascinating. We talk endlessly about boomers and their wealth. We dissect millennials and their avocado toast budgets. We analyze Gen Z like they're some fascinating new species figuring out money for the first time. But there's this entire generation caught in the middle, roughly born between 1965 and 1980, who developed a relationship with money so complex that most financial advisors don't even know how to address. They're not broke. Many of them are doing quite well, but they carry something invisible, a scarcity programming that was installed during childhood and never got an update. And here's the thing most people don't realize. This isn't a personality flaw. It's a psychological adaptation, one that made perfect sense when it developed, but might be holding an entire generation hostage to anxiety they no longer need. I spend way too much time researching the intersection of money psychology, generational trauma, and why some people can never feel secure no matter how much they accumulate. If you've ever wondered why you or someone you know can't seem to relax about finances despite being objectively stable, make sure to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up because we're about to unpack something that might finally explain what's been going on in your head for decades. Before we dive into what makes Gen X's scarcity mindset so unique, we need to understand where it came from. Because this didn't appear out of nowhere, it was forged in a very specific set of circumstances that no other generation experienced in quite the same way. Let's go back to 1975. You're 7 years old. Your parents are stressed, and even though they try to hide it, you can feel it. The economy is in shambles. Inflation is running at 9%. Gas prices have tripled. Your dad comes home one day and announces they're doing layoffs at the plant. Maybe he keeps his job, maybe he doesn't. Nobody knows. You're too young to understand macroeconomics, but you're not too young to understand the tension at the dinner table. You're not too young to notice that suddenly there's generic everything in the pantry. You're not too young to hear your parents arguing about money through the bedroom wall at night. This was the childhood of Gen X. They came of age during the stagflation of the 1970s, the recession of the early 1980s, watched their parents get blindsided by economic forces nobody predicted, and absorbed a fundamental lesson that would shape their entire relationship with money. Nothing is guaranteed, ever. A study published in the Journal of Consumer Psychology found that individuals who experience economic hardship during their formative years, specifically between ages 6 and 16, develop what researchers call persistent scarcity schemas. These are mental frameworks that remain active even when circumstances improve dramatically. Your rational brain knows you're fine. Your survival brain never got the memo. But here's what made Gen X's experience different from other generations who lived through hard times. They watched their parents' generation, the ones who did everything right, who worked hard, who stayed loyal to companies, who followed all the rules, get absolutely devastated. The implicit promise of post-war America was simple. Work hard, be loyal, and the system will take care of you. Gen X watched that promise get broken in real time. Factory closings, corporate restructuring, their fathers coming home with severance packages after 25 years of service, their mothers suddenly entering the workforce, not by choice, but by necessity.
Psychologically, this created something researchers call institutional betrayal awareness. Gen X learned, earlier than any previous generation, that institutions don't care about you, that stability is an illusion, that the only person you can truly rely on is yourself. And that lesson became the foundation of everything. Now, let's talk about what this actually looks like in practice, because the Gen X scarcity mindset doesn't manifest the way you might expect. These aren't people who are visibly anxious about money. They're not the ones panicking at the grocery store or avoiding social situations because they can't afford them. No, this is something much more subtle and in some ways much more insidious. The invisible accumulator. Here's something that might surprise you. Gen X has some of the highest savings rates of any generation. According to data from the Federal Reserve, Americans between 45 and 54 hold an average net worth significantly higher than younger generations at the same age. But here's the paradox. Many of them don't feel wealthy. They don't act wealthy. They don't think of themselves as people with money. I've talked to Gen Xers with $200,000 in retirement accounts who describe themselves as just getting by. I've met people with paid-off homes who still buy generic brands and feel guilty about ordering appetizers at restaurants. This isn't humility. This is a scarcity mindset so deeply embedded that it literally distorts their perception of their own financial reality. There's a psychological phenomenon called money dysmorphia, and while it affects all generations, Gen X seems particularly susceptible. It's like body dysmorphia, but with finances. You look at your bank account, and your brain literally cannot process that the number there represents security. It still sees scarcity, even when scarcity no longer exists. The secret emergency fund. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Gen X doesn't just save money, they hide money from everyone, sometimes even from themselves. If you're Gen X, you probably have a savings account your spouse doesn't know about, or a stash of cash somewhere in your house, or a retirement account you never mention to anyone. This isn't about distrust necessarily. It's about having an escape hatch, a backup plan for the backup plan. This mentality traces directly back to those latchkey kid years. When you came home to an empty house at 8 years old, you learned that you might need to take care of yourself at any moment. No warning time, no preparation time, just sudden self-reliance. That mentality never left. It just evolved. The kid who kept emergency snacks hidden in their room became the adult who keeps emergency funds hidden from the world. Financial therapists have a term for this. They call it hypervigilance. It's the constant low-level monitoring of resources that was adaptive in unstable environments, but becomes exhausting in stable ones. You're always watching, always counting, always preparing for disaster.
But here's what's really painful about the Gen X scarcity mindset. It doesn't just make you anxious about money, it makes you incapable of enjoying money. Picture this. You've worked for 30 years, you've saved diligently, you've done everything right, and now you finally have enough to take that vacation you've been dreaming about, buy that car that would make your life easier, upgrade to the house with the extra bedroom. But you can't. Something stops you. Every time you get close to making the purchase, your brain floods you with what-ifs. What if you need that money later? What if something goes wrong? What if this is the decision you look back on and regret when everything falls apart? This is the cruelest trick of the scarcity mindset. It doesn't just make you afraid of not having enough, it makes you afraid of having enough, because having enough means you have something to lose. Research in behavioral economics shows that loss aversion, the tendency to feel losses more intensely than equivalent gains, is significantly heightened in individuals with scarcity backgrounds. For Gen X, spending money literally feels like losing something precious, even when they're gaining something valuable in return. Gen X doesn't just save for emergencies, they save for emergencies that will probably never happen. Multiple car breakdowns, simultaneous job loss, medical catastrophe plus home repair plus family crisis all at once. They're not preparing for a rainy day, they're preparing for a monsoon, followed by an earthquake, followed by a zombie apocalypse. This over-preparation makes logical sense when you remember what they watched happen to their parents. The lesson wasn't just bad things happen. The lesson was bad things happen all at once, without warning, and they destroy people who thought they were safe. So, Gen X builds buffer on top of buffer. 3 months emergency fund? No, make it 6. 6 months? Better make it 12. They're not preparing for what's likely, they're preparing for what's survivable. The fascinating thing is that this over-preparation often works. Gen X weathered the 2008 financial crisis better than many expected, precisely because they were the generation that never trusted stability in the first place. They had savings when others didn't. They had backup plans when others were blindsided. But there's a cost to always preparing for disaster. You never fully relax into the present. You never truly enjoy what you've built. You're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. The guilt complex. Now, here's something that doesn't get discussed enough. Many Gen Xers feel genuinely guilty about whatever financial success they've achieved. Part of this comes from watching their parents struggle. There's a survivor's guilt element. Why did I make it when they didn't? Part of it comes from comparing themselves to younger generations who were genuinely struggling with housing costs, student debt, and stagnant wages. Gen X often thinks, I shouldn't complain. I have it better than most people. And while that might be objectively true, it creates this weird dynamic where they can't acknowledge their own stress because they feel like they haven't earned the right to be stressed. This guilt suppresses their ability to seek help. They won't talk to financial advisors because they feel like their problems aren't real problems. They won't discuss money stress with friends because they feel like they'd sound ungrateful. So they carry everything silently, invisibly, the way they've been carrying things since they were 8 years old. Now, here's where we need to talk about why this matters. Because the Gen X scarcity mindset isn't just a quirk, it's actually a trap that can sabotage the very security it's trying to create. When you can't spend money, even on things that would improve your life, you often miss opportunities. You don't invest in education that could boost your earning potential. You don't take the vacation that would prevent burnout. You don't fix small problems before they become big, expensive problems because spending money feels too risky. When you're constantly hyper-vigilant about finances, you're burning cognitive resources that could go toward actually improving your situation. Studies show that financial anxiety decreases problem-solving ability, creativity, and even physical health. You're so busy guarding what you have that you can't focus on building more. And here's the really painful part. The scarcity mindset often gets passed to the next generation. Gen X parents, trying to protect their kids from financial hardship, sometimes overcorrect in ways that create anxiety. "We can't afford that" becomes a reflexive response even when it's not technically true. Kids absorb the tension, the secrecy, the constant vigilance. The very thing Gen X wanted to prevent, their children experiencing financial stress, sometimes gets transmitted anyway, not through actual scarcity, but through the atmosphere of scarcity that permeates the household. So, what do you do if you recognize yourself in everything I've just described? How do you update programming that's been running since 1978? The first step is actually the hardest. You have to acknowledge that your brain is giving you outdated information. Your threat detection system was calibrated in an environment that no longer exists. You're not 8 years old anymore. Your dad's company isn't laying people off. The gas crisis is over. This doesn't mean your feelings are wrong. They were absolutely appropriate for the circumstances that created them. But circumstances changed and your nervous system didn't get the update. Some financial therapists recommend what they call safe spending experiments. Start small. Spend money on something you want but have been denying yourself. Notice what happens. Notice that disaster doesn't strike. Give your brain new data that contradicts the old programming. Another approach is making your finances more transparent, not just to yourself but to people you trust. The secrecy that felt protective can actually amplify anxiety. When you hide your financial reality, you also hide from the reassurance that reality might provide. Perhaps most importantly, Gen X needs to recognize that their scarcity mindset was an adaptation, not a character flaw. You developed these patterns because they helped you survive. They were intelligent responses to a chaotic environment. The goal isn't to shame yourself for having them. The goal is to thank them for their service and gently let them retire. Here's the truth that most Gen Xers need to hear. You did it. You survived. The thing you've been preparing for your entire life, the financial catastrophe that was always looming just around the corner, you actually navigated around it or through it multiple times. You're not standing on the edge of disaster. You're standing on the foundation you built with decades of vigilance, sacrifice, and quiet determination. The tragedy would be spending the rest of your life guarding that foundation instead of actually living in the house you constructed on top of it. Generation X might be the last generation that truly understands what it means to feel financially insecure in your bones, regardless of what your bank account says. They're not broken, they're adapted. They're survivors carrying survival programming into a world that no longer requires quite so much survival. Maybe the final lesson for Gen X isn't about saving more or spending more. Maybe it's about finally, after all these years, allowing themselves to feel safe. Not because the world has become safe, it hasn't, but because they've already proven over and over that they can handle whatever comes. The kid who came home to an empty house learned to take care of themselves. The teenager who watched their parents struggle learned to build buffers. The adult who weathered multiple recessions learned that they could adapt. That's not scarcity, that's resilience. And maybe it's time to stop running from imaginary disasters and start recognizing the strength that's been there all along. If this resonated with you, please subscribe. And if you want to support these deep dives into how our minds actually work with money and identity, hit that join button to become a channel member. I genuinely appreciate it.